By the way, it's not always the case that everyone just wants to work from home.
Hmm.
You can't be in all places at all times. Equipment is always the weakest link. And at the end of the day, every business is a people business. And because we are human beings who require touch and closeness and proximity, I believe that it is a remarkably important moment in time for people in business to step back and
Hmm.
really authentically sit down and reassess their vision, their mission, and their values.
Okay, everyone, welcome to Scaling Today. So, this is the podcast where we explore how companies scale and also the future of distributed work as well. I'm your host, Yuying Dang, and today we have a fascinating episode lined up for you. Our guest today is Charles Ferguson. He is the General Manager, the Corporate Development Lead for APAC, Middle East, and Africa for GP. So, GP is a leading company in the employer of record space. So, Charles has an illustrious career. Other than GP, he has also worked in senior management positions in various companies like Tricor, ADP, SAP, and Salesforce. But more interestingly, at least to me, he has also owned a jazz bar in Shanghai before for almost like 9 to 10 years. So that
Yeah.
that is actually my memory of Charles. I have known Charles by now for 3 years. I'm
Yes.
very excited to dive into his take on remote work. Welcome to the show, Charles. Would you like to say a few words to our audience?
Doing, thank you so much, both for the invitation and for the very kind introduction. Yeah, look, I'm excited to have this conversation with you, not least of which because you're one of the pioneers
Hmm.
who's taken this sort of remote, anthem and kept waving that flag and moving it forward. And certainly it's evolved quite a lot, right? So we can kind
For
of
sure.
unpack some of the changes that have taken place in the perennial debate around, remote, in office, hybrid, et cetera, ad nauseum.
Hmm.
Indeed, it is the case. The work that I've done has gotten me to this point where I'm fully remote now, and that's been quite an interesting sort of chapter in the career book, I guess, so to
Hmm.
speak.
I can see a
Um,
beautiful garden behind you.
oh, thank you. Yeah, you look, it's very beautiful. We just recently relocated from Singapore to Australia, and we can talk
Hmm.
about that a little bit as well. But yeah, I guess the culmination, the nexus of all of these different sort of threads that we can discuss in our conversation today with, from technology and business model evolution and
Hmm.
I guess changes in globalization, et cetera. I've been very fortunate to be provided the opportunity to work in businesses and companies that you mentioned that have
Hmm.
had different contributions to, I guess, the future of work and where we are today. And what an exciting time. Scary and exciting at the same time, right? So we'll we'll
It
we'll, we'll
is.
discuss that. But yeah, again, thank you for the invitation.
Oh, thank you so much for being here, Charles.
Sure.
Could you tell us actually how you got started with GP? I think when I met you, we never got to that story.
Oh, I'm happy to. So look, it's actually kind of an interesting story, and I guess to a degree, germane to the
Hmm.
times that we live in. I had been working in my last role was with a private equity fund called
Hmm.
Primera Funds.
Hmm.
They had made an acquisition of a business called Tricor, which you mentioned in the
Okay.
preamble.
Yeah.
And Tricor was, and I say the was in past tense because they've now been sold again and merged with
Mm.
a former competitor
Hmm.
called Vistra. So another part of Vistra. It's just called
Okay.
Vistra now. But it was a globally present business services outsourcing company. So what they did
Hmm.
ostensibly was provide accounting, bookkeeping, tax advisory,
Mm.
corporate
Right.
entity setup, that type of stuff. And I
Hmm.
was their global chief commercial officer there.
Hmm.
And in that capacity, one of my partners that I worked with was GP.
Mm. I
At
see.
the time, it's the artist formerly known as Globalization Partners, right?
I
Now
was
we're
going to ask
GP.
you about that. It has been
Yeah,
shortened quite a
it
lot.
has been
Yes.
shortened, it has been truncated, and I think that's great because it's just a little bit
Hmm.
easier. In fact, even internally, before we officially changed our branding to
Yeah.
GP, we call ourselves GP because globalization partners is a 7 or 8
Hmm.
syllable phrase, depending
Yes.
on how you want to say it. Um, and that's a mouthful for a lot of folks. So
Hmm.
GP translates well. But I left the private equity world in the iteration that I was in, and I
Hmm.
took a long sabbatical and reconnected with my family,
Mm-hmm.
and as part of that process, was doing some advisory work for a lot of different firms. And at one point, GP reached out to me and said,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey, we're very keen to become more commercially focused on the Asia
Mm-hmm.
Pacific region.
Right.
Would you be willing to do some work with us?" And I said, "Sure." And
Mm-hmm.
I met with their team, met with some of their clients, and as I said, I'd been a partner in the past, so it became very intriguing to me, to the point where I kind of fell in love.
Mm-hmm.
It was such a beautiful idea what they were providing to the market, and the people that were doing the work were so impressive and compelling
Mm-hmm.
that ultimately I decided to join. Now, the reason I said it was interesting compared to, or I guess to express part of the story as it relates to where we are today, is the fact
Mm-hmm.
that all of this went down in the conversations I had were in March of 2020, and I
Oh,
joined
okay.
officially in May of 2020.
Okay.
Uh, so I joined in the middle of the circuit breaker. For those
Mm-hmm.
in Singapore, that would be like very fresh, painful memory.
Still quite
For
fresh.
those,
Yes.
that's quite fresh. And for those who aren't from Singapore, circuit breaker was our lockdown
Mm-hmm.
in Singapore, and it was severe.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent the first 2 years with the company having not met any of the people physically in the company.
Right, right. So
Um,
GP was remote, like all from the start?
we were um, we were in California, where the kind of the major sales force was at the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah.
They had an office in Boston, where the company is headquartered. There was a small presence there at the
Mm-hmm.
time. Um, Outside of that, in a few other offices around the world, part of what we do is provide the um, requisite HR support and labor
Mm-hmm.
law support that's required to get businesses compliant, right? When
Mm-hmm.
when they go to hiring remote staff,
Yeah.
and they use our local vehicles. So the model that we've incepted 13 years ago is called
Mm-hmm.
Employer of Record.
Mm-hmm.
It's EOR for short. We're big
Mm-hmm.
on acronyms, right?
Mm-hmm.
So um, the the idea being that we hire on behalf of our clients in a local
Mm-hmm.
jurisdiction and ensure that they're compliantly onboarded and paid and all those great things.
Mm-hmm.
So the point being, it is very often the case that in the markets where we operate, we don't have a physical office.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Having said that, um, we did kind of take down the path in the beginning that we might establish formal offices in many places. But as the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic kind of unfurled,
Yeah.
we realized that actually what we were doing by our nature, by our business,
Mm-hmm.
was so efficient that
Mm-hmm.
we didn't really need to have physical offices,
So it was a
unless
realization like that
it was a
happened over
realization. I
some
mean, I
time.
think it
Yeah.
was it was kind of like happenstance to some extent. It certainly was already kind of on deck. It was something that we were doing by happenstance,
Yeah.
but it became part of our core ethos as the way we operate the business,
Mm-hmm.
catalyzed by necessity, but then kind of we picked up the ball and kind of ran with it. We got a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
aggressive about it.
Mm-hmm.
The only caveat emptor that I'll throw into that little brief explanation is where it is statutorily required to
Mm-hmm.
have a physical office
Mm.
presence. Of
Yes.
course, we have offices, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are markets like that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Saudi and Dubai and Japan. There are
Mm-hmm.
instances where you must have a physical presence in
Mm-hmm.
order to comply with the licensure of your particular business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Outside of that, wherever possible, we avoid it.
Mm.
Now there are pros and cons, and we can unpack that.
Mm.
In
We'll
the
definitely be
conversation.
talking about
You know,
that as well.
but
Yes.
but it's yeah, we're fully remote, and that's how I joined the business. And 4.5 years later, I'm loving it. I'm having a
Yeah.
great time.
That's what's enabling you to have that beautiful garden behind you, right? In
That's
Australia
precisely
right
right.
now.
Yeah, the company was super cool about it. I was on my own kind of accord. I decided to move to Australia to
Mm-hmm.
kind of change the scene for my crew, for my family.
Mm-hmm.
And the business was fully accommodating to that because we're
Mm.
set up in that regard.
Okay, okay. Well, I mean, that's certainly the kind of flexibility that remote work, distributed work affords us, right?
Precisely
So
correct.
I'm sure, Charles, you must be so familiar with this, but I know that you grew the GP team within APAC, like to, quite a large extent. And growing a team which is distributed must come with its own set of challenges, right? So what are some of the biggest obstacles that you faced and how did you overcome them?
It's interesting, Ying. I mean, there is not maybe now 4 years, into the I guess the evolution of this pandemic that kind of,
Mm-hmm,
really catalyzed or accelerated this move to being more mainstream conversation around remote, right?
mm-hmm,
Um, Prior to that, I, no one really had tremendous amounts of experience in how this should or shouldn't
mm-hmm.
work.
Yes.
And so, bearing that in mind, I do think it's important for people to often step back for a moment
Mm-hmm,
and take stock of the fact that you should pat yourselves on the back. I mean, most companies, even very, I won't be disparaging, I'll say very
mm-hmm.
traditional businesses,
Yeah.
had to pivot on a dime and figure it
Mm-hmm,
out.
mm-hmm,
Necessity being the mother of invention. uh, Lots of really interesting and creative ways came to the fore,
mm-hmm,
uh, catalyzed, I would suggest, by a robust response from the technology
mm-hmm,
segment of the marketplace, right?
mm-hmm.
So the biggest challenges, I mean, there are so many. I think,
Which one stuck in your mind?
well, look, I think first and foremost, I think, isolation and engagement.
Mm,
When you're, and I don't want to sound hokey about any of the stuff that I'm going to mention, but
mhm.
we are a human capital management business. That's what we
Yep.
do.
Mm,
And at the end of the day, again, to be cliche, and at the end of the day, every business is a people business.
mhm,
So I don't care how completely automated you are. If you're in the deepest nucleus of an AI business, that's
mhm,
wonderful, but it still
mm.
requires some form of humanity inside of the company.
Talented people for sure. That's
Talented
what you need.
people
Yeah.
make it happen, right? And so
Mhm,
you need to combat potential feelings of disconnectedness and
mhm,
isolation and
mhm,
um, all the things that kind of red thread connect to that, like you know, uh, communication and collaboration and culture and
mhm,
things that, frankly speaking, you would deal with anyway should you potentially go into a new market,
mhm,
um, physically,
mhm,
but sort of exacerbated by being completely remote.
mhm.
And there are areas of challenge. I mentioned communication and collaboration. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that that's really important because we are human beings who require touch and closeness and proximity
Mhm,
just to kind of create bonds. It's
mhm.
very difficult to build authentic trust without having been in the same room with someone or gone
Yeah.
through something significant.
You're just
Now,
looking at someone digitally, right? Like you
correct,
can't
on the
create that
screen, it
same
doesn't
feeling.
really do it. Like, you and I have met, we've spent time
Mhm,
together. So therefore, this screen time we're sharing today, this recording that we're doing today, is kind of on top of a pre-existing level of kind of
Yep.
chemical
Exactly.
connection we've had before because we've met, we spent time together, we've had a
Mhm,
drink together. So that's a different kind of relationship
mhm,
to that which you might have with someone whom you've never been in the room with. Having said that,
mhm,
you as a leader, you have to be able to, um, I guess, pull those threads of commonality that you do share. So you can't just look at it like, oh, we've never met before, so I don't know this person. Well, that's not necessarily true. We
mhm,
do have things that we've experienced as humans, together, and it's very interesting to kind of pick up on the uniqueness and the similarity of that. Example,
mhm.
well, everyone on planet Earth went through the pandemic. That's just a
That's
fact.
true. Yeah.
So, to varying degrees of severity, right?
Mhm,
So, not everyone's experience was the same, but everyone had an experience that was propagated by a particular instance in time, right?
mhm,
So, therefore, that's an immediate sort of level setting
mhm,
scenario. And then I would suggest that, when you're going out and trying to, I guess, bring people into your world, if you're an employer,
yeah.
there are methodologies and ways and means by which to find, I guess, hallmarks of potential success
Mm-hmm.
that we can discuss as well. But that, that maintaining clear communication, fostering ways and means by which to collaborate, particularly across different cultures and time zones and stuff, it requires extra effort when it's
It
fully
does.
remote,
Yeah,
and that's just
it
hard.
does.
It's just
It
freaking
does.
hard. Um, and I
So
think,
how do you do it in GP? Because I've seen you together with your colleagues before, and you guys are very close, right? So
yeah,
is there any specific things that you guys do in GP, that brings everyone closer together?
I do think that it does begin, and I alluded to it in my last little comment there, but I do
Mm-hmm.
believe it begins with how you hire, and what you're
Okay.
looking for. I
Mm.
think that, you know, um, I say this quite a lot, so at the risk of potentially boring people who listen to me in other channels or what have you, or who
Mm-hmm.
know me and just go, God, Charles, get another narrative. But here's the point, because I do think it's true, so I'll repeat
Yeah.
myself. I think that the the end of the pandemic, or I should never say the end because it's not going to
It's
ever
still
end.
ongoing.
It's
Yes.
still ongoing. So
Yeah.
in this current point in time, this current stage of the changes that have taken place, um, I believe that it is a remarkably important moment in time for people in business to step back and
Mm-hmm.
really authentically sit down and reassess their vision, their mission, and their values,
Mm-hmm.
both as an individual and as a company.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because, not least of which, because everything in the world has changed in the
Mm.
past 4 years, everything.
Yep. Yep.
And we all know this. In fact, when you and I, just before we started our formal conversation today, we were
Mm-hmm.
having a conversation about just things that are happening on a
Mm-hmm.
daily, on an hourly basis
Mm-hmm.
that are just so profound.
Mm-hmm.
They have such wide-reaching ramifications that if you're operating your business under the same auspices that you were operating in 4 years
Yep.
ago, i.e., you haven't gone back and said, you know what, is the direction that we're headed in still the right direction?
Mm-hmm.
Are the values that we built our company on still the same values? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it is okay to change. It is
Mm-hmm.
okay to, evolve those
Yeah,
things.
because the world is
Um,
changing around you, right? It's
Totally,
changing around us,
constantly,
like, yeah,
constantly.
in remarkable
So
ways.
in very remarkable ways, and they, just like compound interest from a finance point of view,
Mm-hmm.
there's compound impact to
Mm-hmm.
I guess the uh, recency and relevancy of who you are and your values, your mission, and your vision as a company, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
got to reassess that. Now, if we agree that that's true,
Mm-hmm.
then what follows from that is that perhaps the jobs that you are the jobs to be done in
Yep.
your business also need to be reassessed. And in reassessing those jobs to be done, it goes on to follow that you need to take your new vision, new mission, new values, and inculcate or weave that into job descriptions,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the JDs that you were hiring for, let's say, use a basic example. So a sales executive you wanted to hire to sell your stuff 4 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
the hallmarks of success for that sales exec
Mm-hmm.
today, there's
Mm-hmm.
no way that the sales executive 4 years ago, by and large, are going to
Mm-hmm.
be as successful if you haven't started to look for new character traits that are more germane to today's environment than 4 years ago,
So,
right?
so what do you think, for example, like one of those character traits is, Charles, that is like relevant today, but may not have been so relevant 4 years ago, and vice
I'll give you
versa?
I'll give you five.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay,
And
five. Very
yeah, I'm gonna
generous.
give you
Thank you.
I'm gonna give you five right off the bat, and I'm gonna do it so confidently because I speak about it so much.
Okay.
And as is often the case, and you know me well enough to know that I use a lot of acronyms, right? So I'm gonna give you five, and I'm gonna give you an acronym to map them to. Um, the acronym is DICE,
Okay.
DIC, and there's two E's at the end, so it's
Okay.
DICE E squared. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the characteristics that are hallmarks for success in today's environment, and this will go beyond sales. This is like
Mm-hmm.
generally speaking
For
for remote
anybody. Yes.
remote employees, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is the D, and the D is
Mm.
you've got to
Got
be
to write
able
this down. Yeah.
Oh, right on. And I can send it to you as well. But the
Mm,
D stands for determination.
mm,
And
okay.
determination, in this instance, the way I'm defining it is, you know, um, Mrs. Future Employee, Mr. Future Employee, sit down and talk to me about examples of where you
Mm,
have shown determination to overcome really shocking obstacles or
mhm,
something that just came out of left field and just knocked you off your pedestal. You weren't expecting, you got blindsided, but you were
mhm,
determined to either learn from it or overcome it or whatever it is. Just show me examples of determination.
mhm,
And so let that individual express that D.
mhm,
And from that, what I'm looking for is the I, which are insights.
mm,
So
okay.
how were you as an individual able to
Mhm,
take all of this noise that we're hit with every day, right?
yeah.
The TikTok and Instagram and CNN and Al Jazeera
All the
and National
distractions.
Public
Yes.
Radio and all this crazy stuff in the world, right?
Yeah.
How do you get a signal from that noise?
Mhm,
And how do you then deliver those insights so that they
mhm,
can be understood by those around you, right? So
mhm,
there's determination, there's insight, then there's the C, and this is an
mhm,
important one. This is called curiosity.
mm,
So
okay.
can you show me or express to me examples of how you are hungry to learn and take on
Mm,
new challenges, right? Like,
mhm,
what are some examples of where you are continuing to learn, a
yeah.
growth mindset?
Yeah.
From that, the first E is then engagement.
Mm,
How are you able to engage those around you, engage customers, engage prospects?
mhm,
Just take your determination, your insights, and your curiosity and turn that into an engagement, right?
mm, okay.
Or be an engaging individual. Engage me with a story, for example, about
Mhm,
your determination, your insights, and your curiosity.
mhm,
And the last E is the most important out of all the parts of this story in my mind, which is empathy.
mm,
And I want you to be able to show me how you are able to
mm,
give me examples of how you are able to put yourself, into someone else's shoes. Doesn't mean put
okay.
their shoes on you, but can you understand what it's like to be in someone else's circumstances, and can you kind of show some consideration for that? And
Okay.
if someone's able to do those things,
Mhm,
or has the potential to thrive in that type of environment that would require those types of things
mhm,
to survive, then that individual has a higher likelihood of success in a remote environment
mm,
than someone who doesn't have those things. Now,
mhm,
of course, there are competencies and experience and
mm, skills
personality
and
and all
so
this sort of,
on. Yeah.
sure. And that's 101. But
Mhm,
without those five kind of character traits, an individual is going to be wildly challenged in a fully remote, fully autonomous environment, right?
mm,
That's been my experience thus far. That's what
okay.
I've seen.
Okay. And do you find that it makes a difference, the number of years of experience someone has? Or can you find dice in someone who's just like 1 or 2 years out of school? Or do you only find them in like people who are a bit more mature?
Look, I think that people will have varying degrees of those characteristics, but I think that, again, I don't want to keep bringing this up as like, the I guess the flag of the moment, but I do think a lot of people who are at working age
Hmm.
who did just go through this massive, you know, task on humanity, right?
Hmm.
Do have I guess the fertile ground to prove out those five characteristics, even if they were just in school,
Hmm. Oh yeah, school was
kids,
remote as well, right? Wasn't
school
it?
was fully remote. School, I mean,
Yes.
kids got completely and utterly socially disrupted, right?
Hmm.
And had to instantaneously go through motions that are just not normal for children to have to go
Hmm.
through.
Hmm.
um, I would suggest that even more dramatic for kids than for adults, and we have better coping mechanisms, right?
Hmm.
These were kids that, in formative years who must have the social interaction
Yeah.
required
Yeah.
to form themselves to be
Hmm.
productive
Mm.
humans. And so folks who went through that and have been able to come back through the other side and really harness the IRL in real life world, as well
Hmm.
as the remote work, might not have 20 years of work experience. In fact, I would say to you that I'm
Hmm.
more impressed with older workers
Mm-hmm.
who show their ability to kind of like go through
Adapt to
these
the new
areas,
digital norms.
right?
Yes.
Then
Yes.
the younger workers are coming in. So
Mm-hmm.
um, and I will say this too. I think it's really, I have seen anyway, a huge positive result of, I guess, a climax community now of multi-generational workers working together
Mm-hmm.
as a result of being remote. I think
Mm-hmm.
historically we always had the hand wringing of, oh my God, we've got baby boomers and Gen Xers and millennials and all these people
Mm-hmm.
now working together. Yeah, in an office environment, it can be quite confronting because it's
Mm-hmm.
so in your face. But
Mm-hmm.
when everyone's remote and everyone's kind of democratically working together across
Mm-hmm.
different platforms, age doesn't necessarily become an inhibitor. It actually becomes
Mm-hmm.
a tool to enhance the gaps on the other side, right?
Mm-hmm. I
That's
agree
quite
with you.
interesting.
Yeah. And it's not just age, right? But it's also like
No,
race, it's
race,
culture.
gender,
Yeah. Everything.
orientation,
Yeah.
religion, um, uh, body ability, the
Mm.
amount of opportunity that's now available to people is quantums beyond what it used to be,
Yeah.
even 40
Yeah.
years ago. It's
Yep. And it
awesome.
definitely opens up like global talent as well, right? Because now you get people working in secondary cities who are able to apply for like good jobs from good kind of companies.
Yeah. Which is
Okay.
incredible. Incredible.
Yeah, it is. So Charles, maybe getting a bit more to the nitty-gritty of
Yeah,
things, right? So on and offboarding team members remotely can be challenging. And I do know, I think I've spoken to Graham, like a GP does have team members in different countries throughout
yep,
Asia, and now you're handling people in like Africa and like the Middle East as well.
right.
So what's your process for bringing new team members on board and maybe offboarding those who have left for other opportunities? How
Sure.
do you handle like the last mile kind of equipments and IT support for them?
Yeah, look, the tactical aspects can be really, really challenging, right? So
Hmm.
in the beginning, when we first started to ramp in APAC, my home office was the IT center,
Your
right? So
office.
yeah, like my quote unquote office, and my desk and
So
our
you were the
and our
IT closet.
yeah, man, I was the IT closet. I mean, it was absolutely,
Okay.
I gotta say it was really fun. It was like pioneering startup kind of environment, and it was super exciting and
Very
really,
startup-y.
yeah,
Yes.
very startup-y, very, very startup-y. We work office and storage
Hmm.
closets and imaging and whatnot. But as we became more, I don't want to say more sophisticated, but I guess I want to say
Yeah.
more complex,
Hmm.
more people.
Hmm.
We did hire on IT staff, and they were
Hmm.
obviously very well trained to
Hmm.
image different machines and physically distribute those machines. I
Hmm.
would suggest that services like Esevel, which
Hmm.
provide this incredible flexibility to the scaling
Hmm.
story,
Hmm.
are the current, I think, success model, and I think it's only going to improve and become more ubiquitous as companies
Hmm.
embrace this hybrid world that we operate in now.
Hmm.
And I think that's the appropriate model,
Hmm.
wherein you know maintaining inventory and maintaining currency of systems and
Hmm.
the security that's required, particularly in today's highly volatile
Hmm.
cyber environment, which can be so
Yeah.
fraught with risk.
Yes.
Having a business that is fully dedicated to, I guess, the distribution of these types of tools
Hmm.
and the ergonomics that are required to ensure
Hmm.
that workers are well supported and safe,
Hmm.
and are working in environments that are conducive to their mental and physical health,
Hmm.
uh, is incredibly critical, and you can't be in all places at all times, right?
Mm,
So
that's true. I mean,
uh,
GP has like almost 1,500 people by now, right?
yeah,
I
we're
was
like
looking at
1,500
it.
people around the world.
Yeah,
We exist in 187 countries around the world,
that's crazy.
and
Yes.
it's
So
it's
you
difficult.
definitely need a very fully fledged and big IT team to handle all those things.
You do, and
Yeah.
outsourcing that is not a choice for us. We don't,
Hmm.
meaning, when I say that, I mean, we're not going to outsource the entirety of our business model.
Hmm.
The outsourcer outsourcing seems a little bit insane, right? So, but having said that, where there are services that can enhance our ability. I'll give you a perfect example. So
Mm-hmm.
look at Zoom, right?
Mm-hmm.
You and I are having a conversation right now on Zoom.
Yes.
And back in the old days, or I shouldn't say it that way. Uh, in
A few
in
years
in
ago.
previous in previous times, right?
Yes.
We would be maintaining um, more enterprise grade video conferencing equipment, right?
Mm-hmm.
In different facilities all around the world, and that can be um, fraught with a lot of both maintenance and upgrading challenges as well as security challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas and it's the same thing for software as a service, right? As
Mm-hmm.
opposed to having multiple versions of different types of operating systems or different types of applications, versioning, et cetera. When you're operating in the cloud, everything is immediately ubiquitously available and
Mm-hmm.
you have access to the latest and greatest, and it's merely signing in through a browser, which makes everything a lot more scalable
Mm-hmm.
for distributed workforce. Similarly, when you take that SaaS model and apply it to the physical world, which is what
Mm-hmm.
Several does as an example,
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
it's like productivity equipment on demand,
Mm-hmm.
and the confidence that that piece of equipment is going to be adequately and accurately provided and configured and sort of
And
tracked
secured. Yes.
and secured. And that's just as important for the onboarding phase as it is for the offboarding phase, because
Mm-hmm.
people leave, and that's part of life,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully for even greener pastures, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, we need to be able to ensure that we get back that that physical piece of equipment, and that
Mm-hmm.
all of the access points to various data sets are
Mm-hmm.
secured and appropriately terminated where required.
Mm-hmm.
Not least of which because obviously we're not only handling our own 1,500 employees, right? We're handling tens of thousands of employees on behalf of our
The
clients.
talents that you're doing. Yeah,
Correct. And
exactly.
that data is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would suggest that the cloud, by and large, addresses those concerns.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we are all the various GDPR and all the various ISO certifications to ensure that we are secure and best in class.
Mm-hmm.
However, um, equipment is always the weakest link.
Mm-hmm.
Telephones and computers, particularly, and
It's still like
iPads.
atoms as opposed to like bits and bytes, right?
Totally, exactly, spot on.
Yes.
So, you know, we use services like eSeveral, and we advocate those types of services to our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have our own. I mean, lots of companies don't operate in Africa, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in those instances, we have to have a hub and spoke model where we have a centralized repository, our
Mm-hmm.
IT environment, FedEx,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of remote management, a lot of remote monitoring tools that
Mm-hmm.
we utilize to ensure that everything's buttoned up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I'm pleased to say that the model continues to evolve, and it's no
Mm-hmm.
longer in the closet in my foyer in the house.
I'm sure your wife is happy about
Oh,
that.
she's totally stoked. It's fantastic to not have 15 to 20 laptops stacked up in my room, with a plant
Yeah.
sitting on top of it, like furniture.
Yes, I think I recall some of your colleagues mentioning it to me as well.
Absolutely.
So Charles, I wanted, because you're at the forefront, right, of like where remote work is going, where distributed work is going. So looking ahead, like what
Yeah.
trends do you see happening for distributed work and remote work? We spoke about remote work, hybrid work, and on-site work. Do you
Yeah.
see it becoming more common with mainstream companies, or do you think it's, going to be something that will be a niche for some time?
Yeah. Look, I think in the beginning, when I saw it working so bloody well,
Hmm.
fully remote,
Yeah.
I was religiously convicted to the idea that that was the future of work.
Hmm.
Okay, that is a future of work, right?
Hmm.
It is not
Just
the
one
only.
option.
It is one
Yes.
option, exactly. And so, I also think that we the royal we, okay, in this instance, talk about oh, the future of work and remote and all this stuff.
Hmm.
We get a little bit myopic sometimes, in my view, because we don't often realize or understand that there's more in this world than information workers, right?
Hmm.
Not every worker on the planet uses Zoom. as a tool,
Yep, yep, for sure.
or
You still have
Teams
retail
or Google
workers,
Meet.
F&B
Yeah,
workers, and all that.
so
Yeah.
many, right? And they themselves were essential during the
Hmm.
height of the pandemic.
Yes.
And we didn't realize how essential they were until we needed them, right?
Hmm.
And now we know it, but my concern is that we might forget about it as
Hmm.
people go back to quote unquote the before times, right?
Hmm.
Um, it's important for us to, I feel, um, remain steadfast in our resolve around constantly revisiting the models that work and don't work related specifically to you and your company. You know, it's
Hmm.
not like because a company in my particular genre did it this way and they were successful that I have to follow the same course.
Hmm.
Everyone's culture and the types of work that they do and the jobs that they perform, et cetera, are
Hmm.
unique and different, just like the humans that do them, right?
Hmm.
And by the way, it's not always the case that everyone just wants to work from home. I mean,
Hmm.
I'll throw it out there as a fact that
Hmm.
younger workers coming into the workforce today
Hmm.
certainly want the empowerment of choice,
Hmm.
but given the choice, more often than not, they're willing to spend more time in the office than away from the office. And why is
Hmm.
that?
Hmm.
Because they want social interaction, man. You know,
Hmm.
they want to be able to sit down with people and
Learn from
go out for
them
a
and
drink after
everything.
work or
Yeah.
go have lunch or, you know, get, I guess, uh, osmosis style learning by
Yeah.
role modeling people that work in their environment that might have more
Hmm.
experience than they do. Or
Hmm.
how many people do you know, or how many people during the course of your career do you know who had a very significant relationship in their life because of somebody they met at work? You know, I
Hmm.
mean, this
Hmm.
stuff happens all the freaking time.
Hmm.
And it doesn't happen super duper often over a screen, you know?
No, you're sitting in your home office, like you're not looking at an, like
Exactly right.
your colleague and thinking, should I ask him or her out?
Right. And here's the other thing too that I think a lot of I can speak for my experience working with an American company.
Hmm.
They don't understand very often. This goes back to the last E in my DICE model of empathy,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, a a 26-year-old salesperson
Hmm.
sitting in their apartment in Tsimshatoi
Hmm.
in Hong Kong
Hmm.
is in a 400 square foot apartment,
Yeah, that's true.
right?
That's true.
And it very well could be the case that they're in a 400 square foot apartment with their mom and
Yeah.
their auntie
Hmm.
and who knows what else, right?
Hmm. Life
And
is very
so
different there. Yes.
and they need space, they can even have a telephone conversation, you know?
Hmm.
So yes, there's that opportunity to be able to go out and sit in a coffee shop,
Hmm.
but what they require is often a dedicated space to get their work done. So
Mm.
I think that the future is going to be a hybrid workforce. I think that it's going to
Mm.
be
Okay.
incumbent upon employers to provide that empowerment of choice.
Hmm.
But what that does mean is that it changes the nature of what the office is, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
It becomes more like, I guess, exhibits of culture.
Hmm.
Uh, there are sort of artifacts of culture that can be inculcated into environments to kind of express what's important. And
Instead of
I
just
think
cubicles and hot
instead of
desk.
cubicles, exactly. And I think it's
Yeah.
going to be much more a tendency towards collaboration,
Mm.
and a tendency, quite frankly, to, um, I guess, amplify some of the good things that happened during the fully remote times,
Hmm.
i.e., the CEO and the CFO
Hmm.
and the VP of sales in a virtual room having a meeting with the receptionist and the sales exec who just joined the company and a
Hmm.
marketing manager, right?
Hmm.
Historically, that might have been a separation. That might have been like
Hmm.
an executive leadership team and then the
Hmm.
people the actual work, right?
Yeah.
And now there's this opportunity to blend those together. And I
That's
think that
interesting. Yeah.
I think that's wonderful. And you get
Yeah.
so much more clarity. And, you know, it's funny, right? I think it was Steve Jobs who said, we hire smart people so they can tell us what to do, not so we can tell them what to do, right?
Yes. Yes.
And I think that the new work environment takes that into account.
Mm-hmm.
and allows us the freedom and the vulnerability and the transparency to get everyone to contribute to the strategy. Just
Mm-hmm.
because you're a new salesperson doesn't mean that you know less than I know. It might mean that
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot more about a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
but you might know a lot of things about stuff that I have no clue about, right?
Mm-hmm. So you
And so
have this
creating it,
mixture of like knowledge and
absolutely,
people and experience.
totally. And so creating a psychologically safe space where people can bring their best stuff to the business
Mm-hmm.
and share without fear of kind of like, oh, I don't know if I should say this, or I don't have the right level of title to say this or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Now, look, I'm not suggesting that pre-existing norms shouldn't be respected,
Mm-hmm.
but I am suggesting that they should be challenged.
Mm. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I think that work is going to change for sure.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally, it is. And we haven't. I'm very proud of you and me in the course of this conversation for we have not used the word artificial intelligence yet once.
I'm sure
Um,
that must have been like most of the other podcasts that you were in.
Well, hell, I mean, I think it's in every sentence on every medium, right? But the point that I was going to make is that work is going to change, and it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
accelerated by all kinds of new tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
That, frankly speaking, were themselves accelerated by virtue of what happened and what's
Mm-hmm.
happening. And because of that room to experiment and kind of that permission by virtue of mainstream acceptance of things that heretofore were not mainstream, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like virtual work, et cetera. I think that the slow evolution of robotic process automation, which was taking place in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
accelerated the point of, I guess, enhanced machine learning and
Mm-hmm.
augmented intelligence, which therefore changes the whole nature of work. And I think it puts even more focus or onus on the ideas that I shared with you in the beginning in that
Mm-hmm.
acronym, where the
The
humanity side,
humanity of it.
yeah,
Yes.
the humanity side becomes even more important, and that
Mm-hmm.
humanity can't be fully exploited.
Mm-hmm.
Let me use that word in a different way. The
Maybe not
potential of that
exploited.
humanity
Yes.
can't be leveraged um, without the empowerment of choice and the relinquishing of micromanagement, the relinquishing of control.
Mm.
You have to be able to lean into the new way of getting things done.
Mm.
I think that's exciting.
I think so. I mean, like this is going to be a really exciting few years for us. Well,
Totally exciting.
Charles, we've come to the end of the podcast. Really glad to have had you on board because I knew that you were going to give us like a really refreshing take on remote work. And the last time we had this conversation, I think was about 3 years ago. And I can see that your thinking on it has really evolved since then and it has become a lot more nuanced, right?
Thank you.
And
I'm glad. That means I'm not some staid old man. I'm
no,
still
no,
in the
definitely not.
word.
Definitely not. And I do agree with you actually on a lot of things. So thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your valuable insights. Can you tell us where our listeners can find you? Is there a Twitter
Absolutely.
handle that you're at or LinkedIn?
Yeah, I love LinkedIn. I use it very religiously. So I'm
Hmm.
I'm at Asia Charlie, which
At
is kind of,
Asia Charlie. Okay.
yeah. So Asia Charlie. I think you can find me on certainly that's my Twitter or my X, whatever they call it these days. But I'm ubiquitously using LinkedIn, and it's Charles H. Ferguson is
Okay.
where you find me.
So we
And
link to it in the show notes.
yeah, and please do go to g-p.com and check out what we
Mm,
do as a business.
for
And
sure.
we're proud to be a partner with eSeveral as well.
And we're delighted to be partners of yours. Thank you so much,
Wonderful.
Charles.